This episode of our This Week in XR podcast is sponsored by Zapper. Zapper is one of the world's leading XR companies. Over the past 12 years, they've won numerous awards for memorable campaigns. They've democratized AR by making tools and SDKs that anyone can use. And they created ZapBox, the world's most affordable mixed reality headset. Most recently, Zapper worked with Unilever to create an enhanced QR code called Accessible QR, which enables packaged goods to speak to the blind and partially sighted. If you're thinking XR, give the team at Zapper a call or visit zapper.com to see how they can help you on your XR journey. Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink with Ted Shilowitz and Roni Abovitz for This Week in XR. It's Friday, October 11th, 2024. Good morning, guys.
Good morning. How's everybody?
Morning, everyone.
I'm doing great. Our guest is Justin Maier, co-founder and CEO of Civitai, otherwise known as Civit.ai. They had some pretty exciting news a couple weeks ago about a workflow product that they're integrating into Civitai. Which I'm really excited to talk to him about. I don't think it's gotten enough attention yet in the, Gen AI world, which is so crowded with new announcements every week. But I think this could be potentially impactful. So this week, Geoff Hinton and John Hopfield won the Nobel Prize for their work in AI.
Deal, right? Yeah.
That should be a surprise to no one and well deserved. However, if you remember, he quit Google last year, warning in the New York Times and other places that there is danger ahead from AI. So interesting that he was awarded, kind of ironic, that the Nobel Prize for work that he himself is concerned about. Should we be concerned, Roni?
Roni, yeah.
The short answer is yes. I'll give you the very quick take, and then I know Ted wants to jump in. But think of AI and computing as bizarrely asymmetrical, meaning the number of bad use cases and bad outcomes seems to outnumber the good use cases by some order of magnitude. I don't know why it's so asymmetrical, but there are some really good outcomes as well. Which I think keeps some people, including myself, on the path to try to, use it and leverage it for good. But the amount of misuse potential is incredibly high. So I think this was maybe one of the warnings. I don't think Hinton was like, stop, the research into computing and AI. I think it's like, we need to put guardrails and safeguards in the same way you do with like nuclear energy and other things, which we've not done the best job. But he's sort of waving a flag like, don't just let this thing run unmitigated. Which it currently seems to be doing that, running a bit unmitigated.
Yeah, it was the reason I wanted to mention something is yesterday when I was traveling, I was listening to a podcast. I just looked up the name of it. It's called Your Undivided Attention. And they had an interview with Yuval Harari, who's the guy that wrote Sapiens and a number of other books that kind of cover the human condition in a really interesting way as it relates to technology and technological advancements through a very precise historical lens. So they kind of analyze, like our sort of futurist take, where things are going by looking backwards, right? And he's really good at looking backwards. And he makes some really interesting points that the connection of AI to social media in its various forms, to how media is being now created synthetically as opposed to with a human hand, and is going to sort of push that at scale. He's sort of laying out the cautionary tale of the economics of what this is doing and how people are driving this technology for profit, in some cases massive profit or massive investment. And it's taking it down a pretty dangerous, dark road, to your point about the bad actors. The bad actors don't necessarily need to be the obvious ones, the hackers and the criminals. The bad actors can be the ones that are putting gigantic corporations together for this illusion of good, but in actuality, it's for their own gain and their own profit, which you could argue is capitalism, right? In its purest form. But in this case, when you tie it to such powerful technology, there's a potentially dangerous game afoot that could really affect society. And sort of he proves the point going back in time. So it's a really interesting, it's an interesting time for all of us to think about this.
Speaking of changing society, Elon Musk held a big event yesterday down the street at Warner Brothers lot where he introduced the Robotaxi.
Yeah, robot cars, baby.
and as well as having Optimus Prime serving drinks and attending to people, which I imagine was, I mean, the people who were posting about it, journalists, seemed positively impressed, although skeptical he could pull off a vision this massive. But this is the guy who's like founded 5 revolutionary companies.
Yeah.
At the same time, he's out there stumping for Trump in really weird ways and going all in and knocking on doors and paying people bribes for votes and doing things that are just totally unprecedented. I mean, there aren't any rules against it, but when has a billionaire ever done that? I mean, I give Musk credit for one thing. He is freaking different.
Well, it's like we're all watching a real life documentary of Austin Powers, right? Where Elon plays Dr. Evil, and there's just this strange comedy and danger to it all. And look, on the robotic car side, let me tell you something. He's got a lesson that he's learning from, which is Waymo. Waymo is working. I'm using it. I'm using it every week to commute from the airport in Arizona. It is terrific. Of course, until the day I tell you, well, it wasn't so terrific today. But
and there's no driver. It's a driverless, or is
no driver. There's no safety person in the car. The car is completely and totally autonomous. I could send you some videos if you want to see me in it.
I guess like I am less enthusiastic about that because I probably know too much about AI. And I guess the idea of ceding control in that way, I don't know. I'm not in favor of that. Like, I don't think I'm ever going to
easily see how you would have, let's say, a blogger gets in one of those cars and it takes him to the police station rather than where he has to go.
I mean, look, we all know that air travel is very safe largely because of autonomy, right? When you remove the human equation, which statistically almost all car crashes are caused by human error in some way, shape, or form, distracted driver, inebriated driver, or just a bad driver, or someone makes a mistake, runs a light, misses something. This is using AI and technology really to lower that statistical anomaly, and bring down the deaths and really bad accidents that happen in cars.
By the way, the aircraft thing is a good one. You have a highly trained pilot, often ex-mil pilots, who sit in the seat and are there and they supervise the autopilot. Mm-hmm. So when you have clean air, everything is good, the thing takes up. But if there's turbulence issues, someone's there to step in. So I like that model where there's like a driver in the front who's well trained. Take away the well-trained driver, would you get into an aircraft that had no pilot?
Someday.
I think, believe it or not, I would get into an aircraft with no pilot.
Yeah.
I actually think that there's not a massive corollary difference between the car driving autonomously and an aircraft driving autonomously. I think the bulk of the systems in the aircraft are done autonomously.
I would totally do it, but I would not go first.
Well, someone's going to go first.
I hope they're well compensated for the risk.
Yeah.
So our friends at Spacetop is no more. They've refunded their deposits. If you remember, this was a keyboard computer that tethered to an X-Reel headset, which simulated a 100-inch screen, or presumably with their new version, multiple screens. And it has been cancelado. They have raised $63 million and claim that they're simply pivoting to Microsoft software so that they can address more headsets and be flexible and all that.
So the company is still going to exist?
Yeah. But with a completely different goal.
Yeah, this was one of those, as much as you hate to do this is so obvious, I told you so situation. But when you saw their concept, they were using a little set of glasses that mounted inside a physical keyboard system that was bigger than a laptop. So it was kind of like, why exactly does this make sense? To carry a laptop, I can carry a laptop. I'm going to just plug the glasses into my laptop and have both. What I really thought would be a good idea is like use the glasses with a tiny little like gel roll-up keyboard that fits in
Yeah.
like a cigar tube.
Yeah.
You can put in your pocket. That makes total sense to me because now you don't need the laptop anymore.
I don't know
So
why
it's
this
kinda like
exactly. I don't know why the smartphone isn't sufficient for that use
I'm going to
case.
be a little more blunt here.
Here it comes.
I'll be a little more blunt. First of all, like some early former Magic Leapers, Skip Town, won't get into all the details, ended up in China, which is an entire story unto itself, and founded this company called Nreal. And the work they did at the time and the Nreal system are very highly correlated. Now, the team that founded Spacetop, oddly enough, was working on an internal project, which was what is the future of a wearable augmented reality computer, and what is like the future of work? You're going to carry a Bluetooth keyboard around, and you're going to have a virtual laptop. And we prototyped that, and the idea, the concept of the idea is actually amazing, and it absolutely will happen. Like one day you're going to wear something like the Ray-Ban Metas and have a little portable Bluetooth keyboard and have multiple giant screens, and that will be your laptop, and that will be your workstation, and it's going to work. The problem is forcing that too early, right? When all the pieces aren't there, and trying to do it with like subscale funding, right? With like $60 million in the face of companies that have raised billions or 80 billion, and in the case of Meta, you just can't compete. So I agree with you, Ted and Charlie, like you could have called it from the start. They had no chance of actually succeeding because the amount of funding they had is like, 2 days of Meta. It's just not going to be sufficient to actually pull it off at this stage. Later, when the entire supply chain, 7 years from now, when anyone could just buy parts together and pull together like what consumers want idealized, yeah, you can do a startup like that in 7 or 8 years, but not when you still have to pour tens of billions of dollars into the design and supply chain. And you could have called that ball. The investors probably deluded themselves in that. I don't know.
Well, I certainly called it pretty early on, but you're 100% right that form factors change, right? And form factors tend to get more nimble over time. We moved from the giant CRTs to the flat screens, to the laptop, to the ultra thin laptop, to the smartphone with a really big screen. Oh, that's too big now. So where do we go from here? Can we get it up onto our eyes, right? And that's the whole sector of mixed reality is when will it ergonomically and sociologically make sense, just like with the AirPods and now the Ray-Ban glasses, to move into the era of, I think I can wear this tech comfortably and stylishly. And that's the thing, Charlie, you and I have been talking about it even, a year before Roni joined us every week, and we still continue to talk about it. It is the next evolution of this, right? So we just keep an eye on it.
Last topic before we go to Justin, and that is the release of the first movie made specifically for the Vision Pro. It's done by the guy who did Edward Berger, who did the film All Quiet on the Western Front, the remake of that classic film and book. It's called Submerged, and it uses 180-degree 3D to tell the story of a submarine. So sort of Das Boot in VR, which is kind of a good idea. But you're the one who owns the Vision Pro and are most most likely to see it. The reviews have been mixed, mostly good. So definitely look forward to checking it out when I can get my hands on a headset that I assume everybody will download it because there's no other content for the Vision Pro.
Yeah, there's probably 10 pieces of content. I think certainly it's on my list to watch this weekend now that I'm back home again. I think the bigger issue right now is it feels like the Vision Pro had its arc and its moment where people were paying attention. And then just like the three of us, everyone realized ergonomically it's really problematic. And it's not finding the use case, the uptick. And I'm just not hearing people in my circles talk about it. They've just kind of left it behind. They haven't really even thought about that generation of device. They're kind of thinking and wondering what will come next from Apple that may get it closer to right. So it just feels like the zeitgeist is moving in real time, and I'm kind of watching it and feeling it. I could be wrong. Maybe people are paying attention to this, but it doesn't feel like they're paying a lot of attention to that device and content on that device. I don't know if you're seeing or feeling the same thing.
That definitely. definitely. I get press releases about stuff, but I'm like, is this really news at this point?
Yeah, yeah.
So, but we've got Justin.
Okay.
Hey
How are you?
guys, good. Nice to meet you.
Good meeting
Good to
you.
see you again, Charlie.
Yep, good to see you too. I don't want to bury the lead, so I was at a Civitai event. They had a small film festival, and Justin announced from the stage, possibly surprising his entire communications team, that they were moving from being an exclusively image generation platform to being a workflow solution, so that you could generate an image on Civitai and move it over to you'd have multiple choices of animation tools, and it would all be powered by their token system. And of course, for those animation companies like Runway and Pika and so forth, Midjourney, it's just another point of distribution for them, since the Civitai user is deciding which one to use and possibly already has accounts with those companies. So it's a complicated thing to figure out, but I think as somebody who teaches AI filmmaking and uses AI every day myself, I think it is one of the best ideas I've heard in a long time with regard to AI. So Civitai obviously deeply understands the user. And I think that's another exciting thing about their company that really we should talk about, because it's a community as much as it is a company right now. This will change things.
So, Justin, why don't you tell us a little bit about Civitai? Give us a little background. How long has it been around?
Yeah, and they
How have you
raised some money too, all that.
have you gotten your funding? Give the listeners a little backstory of what it is, because obviously there's a lot of AI image generation groups, companies, entities around.
Yeah.
So, what separates you? What is creating interest around your entity?
Yeah. First off, can you guys hear me all right? Just
Yeah.
making sure that cool. So let me start with the name, Civitai. It's a little unique. And very regularly people will call us Civit AI or Civit. Um, it actually originated from the Latin word civitas. I've always been a fan of Latin names, which is community in Latin. And so what I really wanted to build was an AI community. It started out of a passion, actually. I had a buddy introduce me to Midjourney in August of 2022, and I fell in love. I've been an engineer for almost 20 years now, and so I have a very engineering-oriented mind, and the ability to use my language to try and describe what I wanted to see was like a superpower. And for the next 24 hours after I had somebody introduce me to it, I just could not stop making stuff. It was just so fun to try and produce these things that I had in my head. But unfortunately, at the time, Midjourney didn't have the ability to get new fast credits, and so I had to make the leap to somewhere else to find a way to continue my hobby. And I jumped into Stable Diffusion, got involved in the community there. It was pretty small at the time. There was like a subreddit on Reddit. There was like a few small Discord communities, and everybody was scrambling to figure out how to use this thing to do all kinds of different stuff. And people were tinkering with the tools, figuring out how to like make them do new things, and how to get it as good or better than Midjourney, which was a challenge at the time. And as part of that, people started to figure out how to actually modify models. They would figure out how to like add themselves to models. And so I followed the guide and got the GPU that I needed to do it. And what I noticed is that people started to share these custom models. They were training in new concepts, or they were training in the ability to actually look as good as Midjourney. And then the problem is that they would share them on Discord or Reddit, and then they vanish. So that's really what got us started. I saw a need in this community. People were sharing these things, but then it was hard to share the images that you had made with it and let the creator know how it had gone. And so in October, we started building the first version of the site with just the aim to make it easy for people to upload models, download models.
In October of 22?
2022. Yeah. Yeah. So just, I guess, 3 months after I got into it.
So you were, let me stop you for a second.
Yeah,
So you were agnostic on the tool sets people were using to generate this material. It didn't matter to you. It could all just come into your platform and be viewed and commented on and talked about. And was that the... Case
That
idea?
part came just a little bit later.
Okay.
But yes, we are definitely that way now. It was really about solving a very specific problem at the time. I mean, there was maybe 50 or so models that had existed, and I felt like there was going to be more going forward because people could train in anything. So I was like, okay, people are going to want to bring in all of their characters. They're going to want to capture all of the styles. They'll come up with an infinite number of things. And so the intent for the first version was to make it so that this could be a place where people could share those things, share the images that they had made with those, and that when they upload those images, we would capture as much detail about them as we could. You know, all of the prompts that they'd used, the seed that they'd used, everything that was necessary to basically reproduce that image.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
yeah. I think what had struck me about AI art was that I could create something that somebody else had made. That I could go browse a gallery, find a prompt that they had, put that into my thing with the exact same parameters, and get something that was either exactly the same or really, really close. And I thought that that was a magical experience and wanted to make it easier for other people to do that as well. And being able to have a place for models to exist was part of that, because the model that you use made such a big difference on the result that you got. And so we launched the first version of the site in November to, not a whole lot of fanfare. The thing was pretty small at that point. We posted on Reddit. We got something like 400 upvotes, which was, thrilling. And then things kind of continued slowly. We didn't do any advertising or anything like that because, again, it was just really started as a passion project. And so anytime somebody would post something on Reddit or Discord, and they'd maybe put it in Google Drive or Hugging Face, we'd reach out to them and say, hey, can we put it on the site? And by about January, so about two months later, we'd kind of become the standard for the space. No longer were we having to go pursue people to have them put things on the site. Instead, it was kind of the standard place people would go to upload these things because it was just easier than anywhere else. And
Can I stop you for a second and
yeah, jump in.
I'm going to put on my Professor Charlie hat because I think people need to understand a little bit about how stable diffusion works in order to understand the importance of Civitai, or should I say Civitai, yeah, or Civitai. The way stable diffusion works is it's as probably even casual users, very difficult to control the image generation, and people finesse their prompts and trade tips about it, but it's hard to get image consistency. And what people found very early on with stable diffusion is you can apply an additional filter, right, with a particular look and feel, whether it's photographic, whether it's anime, and that is called a LoRa. And so people were making LoRa's, right? There's LoRa's, there's 5,000 LoRa's on there. So you can choose, it's like a style reference on Midjourney. And so it's sort of, there's so many, it's why build your own. And it's non-trivial to build a LoRa. So the fact that there are so many of them really is a testament to the passion of these users. These are not casual users. These are people who are very serious about AI and computing, and they're doing all of this in a PC environment running locally, right? They would download a LoRa or a checkpoint, which is similar in purpose. And these things are dragged into certain folders, and those folders are dragged into stable diffusion, and it's just not a simple thing for everyday people to use. So Civitai has actually put a wrapper on that, as many people have done, and gives you access to the latest open source models from Hugging Face and GitHub. They have Flux now, which is an amazing model. From I believe from a company that has some ex-stable diffusion people working at Black Forest Labs. So it's terrific because getting your hands on Flux is not like you don't go to Flux to get Flux unless you're a very advanced user of stable diffusion and you're going to download Flux yourself and drag it into stable diffusion and configure it correctly. So that takes a little bit of skill, or like me, clumsy following of YouTube videos. But it's not for the faint of heart. And now there's so many great web-based tools, including Civitai. So I guess my next question for you is, when did you go from sort of being a community of let's say, power users, not prosumers, but people who have using AI with purpose, where did you go from being that community to being a site that people pay for? You have now more members of the public. You actually are a real revenue generating operation now.
Yeah. Uh, it really kicked off in June of last year. We took on funding from Andressen Horowitz. And so we finally had the means to go build out this service for that many people. We had hoped to bootstrap it, but it just was going to be really, really hard to handle that many resources and that many users. And so the aim was to make it so that it was easier for people to access this stuff. I didn't want people to have to use some beefy GPU, like you were saying, Charlie, or to have to figure out how to put these files in the right folders and to follow the YouTube videos that made it possible.
It
And
just was
so,
not fun.
oh, it was a huge pain. Well, and especially when there's so many different LoRa's that you want to use. It's funny, I was just looking at our stats yesterday. 90% of image generations use at least one LoRa, and 50% use four or more. So it's crazy how important they are to kind of apply all of these different little patches to the model, like you were saying. So we wanted to make it really easy for people to use all of them. So the first thing that we focused on was making it so you could generate with any resource on the site. But that only kind of got half of the equation from my mind. The thing that made this stuff really powerful was the ability to create those LoRa's, is the ability to capture those new concepts and share them with the community. And so shortly after we launched image generation, we actually launched another service that made it really easy for people to actually train new concepts. You could just bring, 10 images. I've actually even seen people train them on just a single image. And then what it would spit out is a LoRa that you could then go share with the community. You could experiment with it. You could generate more content. And it's really cool because what it allowed people to do is basically take these niche interests that they have, any sort of art style or character or concept, and then open it up to a whole community. So where there might have been, 1 to 10 images or something like that, now there could be millions of them. And so it's been really fun to see that. But yeah, that's kind of a rough explanation of how we.
So let me see if I can synthesize this in a way that our listeners might be able to correlate the two. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about Turbo Squid as an entity, and I'm thinking about in the 3D modeling world, we have this concept called primitives.
Sketchfab, which is now, I guess,
Sketchfab is another good example, right? In the 3D modeling world, we have primitives that are sort of the starting point to build 3D models upon, right? So you don't have to really start from ground zero. You can start from, I need an aircraft and I need the skeletal of an aircraft, and I'm going to design the skins and the 3D effect of that aircraft based on those primitives. I need to build a human moving from point A to point B with a walking effect, and that's a primitive, right? Turbo Squid is a marketplace of various forms of 3D sophistication that you can use and customize upon, and you can buy them on a marketplace, right? So you don't have to go back to the well every single time and start from ground zero. If I need to do VFX for a movie or a TV show or a short film, I've got some starting point that I can just pay for the work that has been done and generated over the years and years and years.
User-generated content.
Yeah. So is this a pretty direct correlation to that? Like, would this be like, if I was to put a terminology, would I say this is sort of the Turbo Squid of image generation AI, because you're taking all these primitives and these styles, which you call LoRa's, and allowing people to just access those as a starting point and then build upon them, as opposed to all the effort it takes to build that style over and over and over again from ground zero with varying results. Is that a good
I think that's a great comparison. Okay. That's definitely accurate.
It saves you from building your own model.
Sure, I get it. Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah.
By the way, one thing I wanted to add. Sorry, Justin, I just want to digress for one quick second. There's a company called Anything World, which uses AI to create rigging and animation automatically, mostly for NPCs in video games, and they just did a create anything on their site where you can text prompt a 3D asset. And, the one I prompted was like a squirrel detective, and they make it walk like a person. And it's not a perfect 3D image, but you could easily take the thing into Blender and get rid of some of the rough edges. Also, they launched it yesterday. So like most AI tools, it's going to train from the users and get better. But that's another example of a company that's, giving you a great head start on 3D. I don't think Civitai is about 3D that much, but it's certainly creating a LoRa is, again, something that really advanced users do. And people who are less advanced but really want to generate images right away can take advantage of that work. So it's, kind of an open source for LoRa's.
Justin, question: how do you think about this migration? I'm going to use like Napster to Spotify as an example. Like there was a whole gigantic set of excitement around like, oh, we could digitally copy music, and people were doing it, and all of a sudden like all that came to a stop, and now there's like iTunes and Spotify, and all the copyright issues had to get resolved. What do you think is going to happen in image generation? Like how is it something you guys think about? Is it something you think is some it's someone else, is it Midjourney's problem? Is it Stable Diffusion's problem, not yours? How do you see it?
Yeah, there's a lot to think about and talk about there. I think right now it seems like it's something that's going to have to be resolved to some degree. When I think about our site, for example, there's people that train LoRa's on characters that belong to IP holders and things like that, right? And people love to generate pictures. At this point, I kind of think it's getting treated like fan art mostly, which is fine. Technically fan art's against copyright policies as well, but they kind of let it live because they feel like it expands the brand as long as it's, not something that's going to confuse people. So I think that there's kind of that tolerance towards it right now. On the other side, if you got things, if you bring up like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, basically the people that are training these foundational models, there certainly is concern from these companies around, hey, did you use our data to train your models? And I think on that front, as I think about how we learn and how we create, we consume all kinds of content from people that create all kinds of things, and it doesn't belong to us. But what matters is what we produce. If we produce something that's the same as somebody else, then of course they're going to think that we copied them. And so the way that I think that we should be managing this is, handle it on the output, right? Allow people to train on everything, and then keep them from recreating copyrighted content on the creative outlet, if you will. So there's that side of things. The other thing that I think will probably have to happen in the future is that these companies are going to want to be able to use their IP inside of this new AI medium. And so they'll probably need some way to set controls, licenses, kind of boundaries for how their IP can be used. And so it's one of those things that I've thought quite a bit about. And, I'm actively seeking partner relationships, if you will, with these kinds of companies so that as we get to a point where we can give them that level of control, we can help them make that transition. I guess what I'm saying is in your example of, Napster versus Spotify, I think right now the world, like you kind of mentioned, is very much Napster, right? It's the Wild West. People can kind of do whatever they want. And where I'm thinking is, how can we make that transition into the future that we're kind of expecting to exist? How do we create the Spotify, and can we help transition from this Wild West world that we live in into that more, or I don't know, I guess supplier oriented ecosystem? The thing is Spotify is great because it kind of works for both sides of things. The convenience factor definitely makes it functional for
it seems that the cycles happened before, like with YouTube. People that were posting things that they had no rights, eventually that all came down. And I think with like sampling and in Napster, like eventually all the copyright issues, I guess it's going to come down to probably either the Supreme Court or something, because it's going to be quite interesting. Either copyrights, trademarks, intellectual property are upheld or they're not. And if they're not upheld, an entire economic system around the world just collapses. And if they are upheld, then every company has to like run around and like form licensing deals with all the IP holders and artists.
Why do you think OpenAI is running around making deals with the Associated Press and Fox and Reuters and
they're expecting the IP to be upheld?
Yeah, exactly. And so they're thinking by the time that happens, 5 years from now, they'll be able to say, well, our models no longer use that content. And I
Yeah.
think that's why Axel Springer and other people are like, take the money because they're going to get enough people to do this that by the time I sue them, they're not going to be doing it anymore. So,
Yep.
I mean, that's clearly their strategy. I do think they're going to lose, although they have a pretty strong argument for fair use. Their problem is the smoking gun of actually intentionally stealing it, knowingly stealing it, right? Hey, is this an issue? Do you think this is illegal? Fuck that.
Yeah,
So
this gets
once they've
this
got a
gets into
memo of you
this
doing that, it's over.
this gets into this philosophical discussion, A/B discussion of, is AI and all things related to this an inspiration engine or a theft engine, right?
Mm,
And the
mm.
truth is, it's a little bit of both, right? It's blending in that zone that nobody exactly knows, where does inspiration end and where does theft start. And that's a real problem that I think Roni is right, will be attempted to be solved, at least domestically in the US, by the Supreme Court. But in a worldwide global market and global economy, we know that technology transcends borders and transcends laws and transcends restrictions. So I almost think that's a fool's errand. I think it just becomes, to Roni's point, either it is a massive change in the psychology of how people view and touch and think about IP, and economics will change drastically, or it will just fall into another zone like YouTube, where it just evolves and people realize to make it successful and to make it economically viable, you still have to have a marketplace of some level of economy where someone makes hit content and generates income from it, right? So this is the never-ending question that we're all going to be living on
So,
with this
so
podcast
I
for the
want
rest
to
of our
I want to
lives.
make sure that we have time for Justin to explain spine and how spine works and the token system, because that is super exciting. So we've talked a little bit about setting up what Civitai is, how you got here, the community. Let's start talking about what you're building now, and I guess hoping to launch in a few months, which is a big can of whoop ass.
Thank you. Yeah, no, super excited about it. It's something that we've been working on for almost a year now. Um, it all actually originated from this need to be able to manage all of those different resources on top of, a bunch of GPUs. And we started adding more and more services to it. And we quickly realized, hey, wait a second, we should be able to integrate every service here and actually make it so that people can construct workflows, not just using open source resources or open source tools that we've created, but kind of anything that people are building out there. Because what we had noticed is that the best content in the community was things that kind of had a combination of tools being used. They would use Stable Diffusion to generate an image, and then they would animate that image with something like Luma, and then they'd add music to it with Udio, and then they'd animate the face to sing along with the music in Hedra. And so it was this like long, they go through these long, complicated workflows on a bunch of different tools because it's necessary. Right now, you have to go into each of these sandboxes to play with the toys. And we want to bring all of that into one place. So we've already started integrating various partners. We actually have, I believe, 14 or 15 active partner agreements to work on getting them into the tool. We wanted to make it so that it was something that developers could build with, but also something that people could use directly through our UI. And so the aim is to have something before the end of the year, we're working on it, that allows people to not just create a workflow and then share it, but to actually go through their creative process using all of these tools. We'll keep track of the workflow. And then when you post that thing, we can keep track of exactly what you did, so that now what you have isn't just content, but it's content with the ability to recreate it, to remix it, to change any part of it, so that if you want to change out that music, you can do that. Or if you want to change that character, you can do that. And so the hope is that we can create something that not just makes it easier to use all of these tools, but actually allows the medium to completely change. Because now that reproducibility that I was so excited about before kind of goes all the way from end to end. And that in a way kind of empowers the audience to participate in the content in a way that kind of just hasn't existed before. Typically it's just, the ability to comment or react, but this gives them the means to really, really take content and transform it even beyond what the original creator created. So there you go, Charlie. There's the quick overview. I probably missed some things.
Well, we'll talk about the tokenization because I think that's a really important part of it.
Yeah, thank you. Buzz. So our currency is called Buzz, and the reason it's called Buzz is actually dual purpose. one of the key ways that you can achieve buzz or get buzz is by creating content that people like. When you post content that people like, you'll earn buzz from people reacting to it, from people collecting it. If you make a model that people like, you earn buzz when people create images with your model and post it to the site as well. And so it's kind of got like this side of things where it's like, hey, I'm getting buzz, that gives me value. And what we wanted to do is make it so that people that are bringing value to the site don't have to pay for it. So that kind of checked that box for us. And then on the other side, buzz gets used to pay for various GPU services, whether that's image generation or training, like I mentioned. And so it's kind of like, hey, it's electricity, but it's also this thing that allows you to really show off your reputation and earn your place to keep creating and encourage you to make more. So that's a little bit about that token system. And the way that works essentially for paying for these services is, the various services just have a different price. Right now we're working with these various service providers on kind of doing like a volume rate and things like that so that we can handle bringing that into the community. But eventually we want to get it to the point where they can just set their buzz price directly.
Right. So they set their buzz price, and then you have a negotiation with them or an exchange of value with them where they trade in the buzz for cash.
Yep, exactly.
So is there a possibility that there could be a marketplace for buzz the way there is a marketplace for rendering through Otoy?
Good question. I think so. Right now we're kind of just trying to get to that point where we can handle all of it, but I think that there will indeed be a marketplace.
I guess the basic question is, can users exchange buzz, or does it have to go through you? Because if users can exchange buzz, what you'll get is a creator who owns a lot of buzz, but doesn't need all of it at some point and wants to either sell it back to you or sell it to other people with a, discount so that they can harvest the profit from it.
I hadn't thought about creating the secondary market yet. What we had planned on doing and currently have in place for a few creators is we've made it so that they can bank their buzz, is what we call it, where we will pay them for the buzz that they turn in. We have a 30% platform fee that we take at that point to essentially cover the cost of like that rewards program that I mentioned. But so far it's working really well for some people. There's creators that are already making enough to kind of cover the cost of their living expenses and kind of depend on this. So it's cool to see that for some people, this has already transitioned from a hobby into a career.
So we didn't do that. We should have done this at the front where, it's not a real interview. We're just having a conversation here. So people always ask, what questions are you going to have? It's like, well, I don't know. The conversation has to start and, what's going on in the world and everything else. So I guess some of your numbers, I just want you to repeat them for the listeners because they are kind of surprising, right? How many active community members do you have?
Yeah.
I mean, you have like 5,000 Lauras, or do you have more than that?
Oh boy, we have way more than that, Charlie. I think we have around 350 now, thousand.
What?
350,000. Yeah, just a little bit more than 5,000.
Yeah.
I basically say if you can think of it, there's probably a Laura of it. Hopefully there's not one of you yet, Charlie. If there is, I apologize in advance. But
I suspect that the taste in Laura's does not include old guys.
Looking at my image in the car and wondering, could this be a Laura? Because it's kind of an interesting effect going on.
Somebody will take
with
that
the lighting.
and now you can put anybody in that car.
Exactly. As you guys were talking, I was reflecting on Photoshop and a lot of the Adobe tools and this conceptual idea that goes back to kind of the beginnings of the personal computer, the home computer, or the PC, that eventually companies get smart enough to realize that they need to kind of package the brains of a lot of people and make a system that allows things to get easier to do the hard stuff, right?
Yep.
So Photoshop is a really good example of that in terms of there's all these different disparate photo tools that people were trying to experiment with in the 70s and 80s and kind of late 80s around how do you manipulate images on a computer. And then here comes this little startup, Adobe, that says, what if we package all that together and make a marketplace, AKA let's sell the software, right?
Yeah.
And see if it will help people achieve the objective of lassoing in an image and adding a blur effect or tying anything together into a tool set. Now, fast forward to today's game engines like Epic and Unity, it's sort of built on that same philosophy of what if we can make it easier to create this stuff, right? Fast forward to Roblox, which says, what if we can make it so easy that any kid can make their own game, right? And it seems like there's a philosophical part of this around AI, which is there's so much complexity at the base level to create good images that if you can create the Photoshop of AI, I'll use that in quotes, you have a real business. And the idea of tokenizationing that, like I'm seeing that as a real motivating factor around how people will find like valid use cases for blockchain, is that a lot of these AI companies are moving away from traditional fiat currency and allowing people to just create token use cases around a new economy. Since it's a new system, a new technology, it can sort of generally kind of be accepted as there's a new economy that goes along with it, right? So do you have sort of thoughts around that? Is that sort of, am I touching on the philosophically correctly?
I think so. I think, there's certainly elements of Web3 in kind of what we came up with there. I had been a big fan of the incentive mechanisms that people had built inside of those platforms. Another one that really, I guess, resonated with me was the way that games work. We had a really large audience of gamers. I mean, these were people that had GPUs that could run this stuff because they were playing games on them. Now things have shifted a little bit, but yeah, no, I completely agree that we wanted to align the incentives for building the community with, I guess, the means to create awesome stuff and with the value of like, you are making good things. And so it's been very functional for that and surprising at how well it's worked. And I'm glad that it's moved forward this way.
Well, this looks like we're reached the end of all the time we have. We've worn out our welcome. Thank you to our listeners. Ted jumped into the car about halfway through the interview. For those of you who were wondering how his sound went from being really good to being really bad.
Being terrible.
So, and of course, that's what people expect from us. So we've delivered no
Yeah,
less
exactly.
today.
It's our brand.
Well, have a great weekend, everybody. And thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next Friday.
Great weekend.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me.